What's up, everybody? JayzTwoCents here. I'm dropping crap. Holy shoot. Hey, what's going on, everybody? JayzTwoCents here, and you guys have been hashtagging the absolute crap out of me with Show Me the Copper because of, well, Paul and Kyle.
You guys suck.
And you guys have been wondering where the is the 980 Ti Kingpin Edition video. Well, guys, here it is, right here. We're doing it now. Before we move into the benchmarks and stuff, I'm gonna go ahead and address the forehead goatee on my head. Yes, I have up my hairline because I plucked my hair when I'm doing frustrating stuff and I don't realize it, and then I've got to let it grow back. So for the next 2 months, I'm gonna look stupid. So it's open season, go ahead and have fun.
That's it. I'm not touching it no more. I'm not talking about it. I'm not pointing it out.
All right, enough about that. Let's go ahead and move into the benchmarks. But first, it's time to pay some bills. If you've been thinking of getting into the hobby of aerial photography, then I've got some good news for you. Right now, the folks over at Mass Drop are dropping the DJI Phantom Standard, and this is your chance to get in on a group buy at a great price. Check out the link in the description for more details. And if you're watching this in the future, then be sure to head on over to Mass Drop and request that they drop this one again. Okay, so I don't want to actually spend a lot of time talking about the card's looks and stuff. I think we've seen it enough. It's all over their website. You guys have seen pictures on Instagram that I've posted. And if you're not following Instagram, you should, because you would have seen this already. Backplate. It's got a backplate, but then again, you better put a freaking backplate on this thing because of how much it costs. But it's got an all black metal cooler and a massive amount of copper under here. All the fins are copper, all the heat pipes are copper, the cooling plates are copper. They've really, really thought ahead on that. Now, this card is really meant for LN2 overclocking and at least water cooling. But we're going to talk about air cooling. We're going to talk about, I forgot to take a sticker off this. Oops, I guess we'll do that right now, huh? There we go. Now it's used. So at the heart of this thing is a GM200 core with all 2816 CUDA cores unlocked. 7,000 megahertz GDDR5, 6 gigabytes of that, and other than that, that's all that's really inherited from the NVIDIA version of the card with the 980 Ti Kingpin. This one's actually got 14+3 power phase on here. It's got triple BIOS. It's got physical V-droop switch on the back. If you guys have ever followed like high-end overclocking back in the, let's say, the 580 series, the 480 series, guys were having to do like the pencil trace. We actually drew traces on the PCB with a pencil using the lead to make various connections on the PCB so that you could get things like V-droop enabled, because all that stuff was sort of disabled from the factory. You couldn't control V-droop. V-droop was a thing you had to deal with, and if you wanted to do high-end overclocking, you had to find your way around V-droop, which is where the voltage will actually drop under load conditions and create instability when you're shooting for a certain voltage target and you can't hit that because of the VRM infrastructure. So Vince over at Kingpin has designed a mechanical V-droop switch on here so that if you want to try and push the clocks as far as you can, you have control over that. But there's all sorts of knobs and dials and whistles and stuff on this thing. And on top of it, it's got RGB. Everybody's going towards RGB, and you can control that with Precision X16. Now 5.3.7 is recommended with this card because 5.3.6 had some bugs in it. So all the results you're going to see today regarding overclocking and testing were done using overclocking suite built into Precision X 5.3.7. Now because this thing has such a massive cooler on it, it is freaking heavy. I know I talked about the MSI card being really heavy, and this thing is massively heavy compared to that. Now, power delivery on this thing is nothing short of gargantuan. It's got two 8-pin PCI Express plugs on here, as well as a required 6-pin. There's been cards in the past where you could use the two 8-pins or even the 8-pin and the 6-pin and not use the other one unless you needed it for auxiliary power and high-end overclocking. Nope, on this one here, you've got to have all 3 power connectors plugged in, which means if you want to go with more than 2-way SLI, if you want to go 3-way or even 4-way SLI on this, you're going to have some custom power supply options ready because there's not a lot of power supplies on the market that will actually give you 3, 6, 9, 12 PCI Express power plugs for 4-way. But then again, I don't think many people are going to be going 4-way on this card. In fact, I'm not even sure you could buy 4 of these at one time. They're so freaking scarce. All right, enough about that. Let's go ahead and turn around. Let's talk about the charts, and then I want to talk to you about my experience with this card, and we'll just get right on down to brass tacks. Honestly, there's a lot to talk about here. So if this video is a little long, sorry. No, actually, I'm not sorry at all.
Watch the whole video. You might learn something.
Transition.
All right, here we go. We're gonna go ahead and talk about some charts, but guys, do me a favor. Yeah, I know the colors and stuff aren't representative of the brand, and I'm working on making it so that NVIDIA cards are green on the chart and AMD cards are red. I'm not very Excel proficient, actually, so if anyone can email me and tell me how to make it so that like the Gigabyte 980 Ti would always be green no matter where it is on the chart, because what I've noticed is if I make the actual graph itself green, right here representing the G1 Gaming, if the G1 Gaming moves, the bar up here stays green with whatever's in its place. So yeah, anyway. Okay, enough about that. Let's go ahead and talk about the cards we're going to compare it to today. Now I decided to go ahead and pick cards that are in the same performance category because we want to compare the 980 Ti Kingpin to what NVIDIA has offering from the other brands, MSI and Gigabyte. I do not have an Asus Strix. Do not ask me about the Asus Strix. I cannot answer your questions about the Asus Strix. Asus doesn't send me graphics cards, so I cannot include them in my benchmarks. Moving forward, we are comparing it to the R9 Fury Tri-X, which is the air-cooled Fury card. We are comparing it to the Fury X, and then we are comparing it to the Titan X and then other variants of the 980 Ti. And as you can see right here, I have thrown in the GTX 970 SSC SLI because it is the exact same price of the cards here in the 980 Ti range. So here is the actual pricing right here. Now you can see over here on the left, I've got all the graphics cards pricing, but the chart is only going to, well, actually it's including all of them. So anyway, as you can see, the 980 or the 380 Nitro is $219, but they go all the way up to $1,049 for the Kingpin 80% ASIC quality card. So you can see we've got 4 Kingpins represented here. 72% plus, 74% plus, 76% plus, and 80% plus. And the Titan X right here at $999, matching the 76 plus ASIC quality from the Kingpin. Now, what I find kind of curious here on the pricing, and I don't know why they did this. In fact, I didn't ask them, and I should. You've got a 2% bump between the 72% and the 74%, and a $50 price difference for that. $850 versus $899. Technically, that's actually $849. I should probably fix that. Boom, fixed. Okay, see, that's how we do. All right, but if you look here, the 74% and 76% are again a 2% jump, but a $100 percent. Numbers are hard. You have a $100 difference between that 2%. But then you have a 4% jump between 76% and 80%, and again, only a $50 jump. So, EVGA, why the $100 jump between 74 and 76? Wouldn't the 76 or the 80% plus be a rarer bin, making this more than a $50 jump? So I don't understand this $100 gap right there. So I just wanted to point that out on the pricing. But I am showing pricing. This is based on Newegg's pricing right now. And, of course, this pricing is dynamic and is going to change. And I will try to keep these charts up to date as pricing changes. But as cards become unavailable, and they become phased out, the pricing becomes no longer relevant on older series cards. So it's always going to be the current series, which is why I don't have, the Matrix Platinum in here. Oh, look at that. A Power Color R9 390X hybrid. Maybe we'll be doing something with that. Okay, core clocks, overclocking. As you can see right here, the GTX 980 Ti Gaming from Gigabyte is 4 megahertz faster on the max clock than I was able to achieve with my Kingpin. We were really trying for 1550 on the Kingpin, and we couldn't do it. In fact, I had EVGA helping out. We couldn't do it. My card is a 70. He said he thinks it's a 78% ASIC quality. GPU, I forgot to look at it. GPU-C, man, total fail. Yeah, I'll annotate what the card's ASIC quality is actually, or put up a screen cap. I'll do that before I edit this video. Okay, anyway. So you can see the G1 Gaming and the Kingpin are going to be pretty much neck and neck on clock speed. This 4 megahertz isn't going to make any difference. The 980 Ti is trailing behind at 1514 max. 980 Ti hybrid, 1484. 970 is at 1400. The reference card for 980 Ti, to compare, is at 1402 overclock, and my Titan X is only at 1400. I want you guys to keep this in mind as we go through the benchmarks, because this is 125 megahertz slower than the Kingpin that we're going to be comparing it to. Obviously, the Titan X has more CUDA cores, 256 more of them, but we are running a bit slower here. So I have 4 Titan X's in this office, but the 3 best ones obviously are in Skunkworks, and then the one that's left is, that's the one we have here, which kind of craps its pants at anything over 1400. Not a very good overclocking Titan X. All right, temperatures. The Titan X reference was the hottest at 86, and so is the reference. That makes sense. These are reference coolers. The Kingpin overclocked maxed out at 75. And as you can see, the Fury X and the 980 Ti Gaming both at 75. Actually, all 3 of these at 75. And then the Gigabyte G1 Gaming came in coolest at 72. And then, of course, the AMD Fury X came in the coolest at 56 because water cooling. Firestrike. Here is Firestrike. And we've talked about this before, where this is not a very accurate representation of really testing real-world experience or real-world performance on a graphics card. So, again, I want to point out that the 970 SSC SLI, of course, scored the highest. But I'm only showing this graph, and I only include Firestrike because I want to really reiterate with the viewers that Firestrike and Heaven and Valley Benchmark are synthetic, and they just do not account for enough API and other variables in gaming, API and DirectX optimization, where this is not going to be a true representation. Some reviewers would be like, hey, 970 SSE SLI is the fastest Firestrike benchmark score, therefore we can denounce and use other big words and things that probably don't fit in the sentence to say the 970 SSE SLI is the best config. Done. Ship it. That doesn't work that way. So the 980 Ti Kingpin overclocked was giving us a graphics score. Remember, guys, this is graphics score. This does not take CPU into account. 21,117. Holy crap. That's the fastest single card I've ever had come through here on Firestrike. And you can see here on the extreme numbers, 10,078 and 5,015 on the Ultra there. So when we sort it by standard, which is 1080p, you can see Kingpin overclocked is king, and the Kingpin non-overclocked is below everything else, but that's because, admittedly, the Gigabyte and the MSI, I don't have benchmarks yet for stock speed. I've got to go back and do those. So these are all technically overclocked. I forgot to put the little OC on there. So anyway, if we sort this now by extreme, you can see it pretty much stays the same. We had a couple things swap spaces right here. The hybrid and the MSI and the gaming 6G, those swapped. When we look at Ultra, Kingpin OC is even beating the 970 SSC SLI, but that's because we're running into kind of a VRAM an issue here. 3.5 gigabytes of VRAM, it really starts to fall off, and the SLI is being beaten by a single card here as well as the hybrid. Witcher 3. I found this to be kind of interesting because the 980 Ti Kingpin overclocked, as you can see right here, 97 frames per second, just smashing the SLI config here of the 970 SSC. So as you can see, Firestrike, you can just kind of take a dump because obviously that's not representative of real world. 97 frames per second overclocked on the Kingpin, absolutely insane. I mean, almost 100 FPS. Witcher's a hard game to run, and it did a fantastic job at 1080p as it should. 1440p, same story, 71 FPS, 2 above the G1 Gaming from Gigabyte, and beating out the Titan X even with 256 less CUDA cores. The rest is kind of self-explanatory. And the 4K, once again, the Kingpin OC and the 970 are matched at 4K. So that's what I thought was kind of curious about this, where 4K 42 frames per second on the Kingpin overclocked, and the SSC SLI 970s were matching it. But the SSC SLI could not actually keep up at 1080p or 1440. Which was kind of weird because you would think the 4K is putting a bigger stress on the VRAM on here. So I don't know Witcher 3 has always been kind of a weird benchmark, so I like to include it because I like weird things. GTA 5, 1080p, no surprise here. The SSC SLI is winning, 141. Kingpin right behind it, 139 FPS. And then we just kind of go down from there. Unfortunately, I mean, you can kind of see here, I haven't been mentioning AMD much representative because really AMD's Fury is not representing. I mean, these numbers are very contrast, which is kind of unfortunate, especially when the Fury and the Gigabyte 980 are only $30 apart, so that's too bad. Metro Last Light. Oh wait, we forgot to look at the other resolutions. 1440p, the 970 SLI still wins. Kingpin followed by the Titan X, same exact FPS, and then the MSI and the Gigabyte matching each other at 95, and then the rest is down from there. But look at this, 105 on the, or I'm sorry, 98 on the Kingpin versus 95 at 1440. Not a huge difference. And 4K, same story. The 970 SLI wins in Grand Theft Auto 5, hands down. 3 FPS faster than the Titan, but the Titan is faster than the Kingpin at the 4K settings for GTA 5. And then, of course, Gigabyte and MSI trailing a couple FPS behind. I mean, these are so close, though. You're not going to notice a performance difference between these two. Metro Last Light, 1080p. Kingpin just blows everything away here with 156 FPS. 1440p. Again, the SLI config wins, but the Kingpin's right behind it, 102, and just pulls ahead of everybody else by quite a bit. Unfortunately, AMD is still down here. Come on, guys. Catch up. And then 4K, you can see 53 for SLI of 970s, and 980 Ti Kingpin 49 matched the Titan X. So you can see and I'm sorry I'm sniffling here. I've got a little bit of a cold, but anyway. The 980 Ti Kingpin overclocked is matching the Titan X overclocked. But remember, the Titan X is 125 megahertz slower than the Kingpin, and it's matching it in a lot of these tests. So we'll talk about that in a minute. Crysis 3, 106 FPS for 970 SLI, followed by the Titan X at 102, followed by the Gigabyte, then the MSI, then the EVGAs. So for whatever reason, the Kingpin just in Crysis didn't really keep up with, I mean, granted, we're talking a, 4 FPS difference between the Titan and the Kingpin. Again, the Titan much lower overclock, obviously. But yeah, compared to when you overclock it, it goes from 91 up to 98. So that's a 7 FPS increase. That's a pretty big deal. 1440p, Titan X is the winner, followed by 970 SLI, followed by Kingpin OC at 67. In fact, they're matched at 67. And then everything else just kind of like fell down, which is kind of funny. Especially since the Gigabyte and the MSI are overclocked, and they weren't matching these numbers. That's strange. I need to go back and overclock these, or not overclock, but put these back at base clock and see what happens. They'll be even farther down the chart. AMD's still down here, like, wait for us, guys. Far Cry, same story. The SLI config wins. Titan X, followed by Kingpin. Way over 100 FPS, though. Unless you have a 144 hertz monitor running 1080p, obviously you shouldn't even be looking at this card. 1440p. Again, 970 Titan X, followed by the Kingpin. All at 79, though. Just bam, bam, bam. I love that a single GPU like this can actually match the 970 SLI. That's a big deal to me. When one card can match 2 cards, especially 2 cards that are not slouches. The 970 is not a slouch. 4K, as you can see here, again, SLI, 970s, Titan X, followed by Kingpin. But only 2 FPS difference between the leader and where the Kingpin is. And then followed by the MSI and the Gigabyte. And last but not least, Battlefield 4. 177 FPS in 1080p. So even if you had a 14 or 144 hertz monitor, you would have to enable G-Sync or V-Sync or FreeSync or whatever you have. No, actually not FreeSync. Ugh, my bad. Because they're down there under 144. Anyway, if you have 177 FPS, you still have to enable VSync or you're going to get some tearing. That's a big deal when one card can make a 144 hertz monitor have to enable G-Sync or VSync. When we look at 1440p, 128 frames per second, the Titan X, those CUDA cores picking up the slack. 970 SSC SLI at 124, followed by the Gigabyte, then the MSI, then the EVGA hybrid, then the reference, then the Kingpin. I don't understand why the Kingpin just like fell on its face down here. This doesn't make sense to me. But I did it several times, and you know, Battlefield Far Cry. Yeah, there we go. Battlefield 4 is a hard game to actually benchmark because there's so many variables in it. I mean, it's just impossible to keep things static and consistent. So it could have just been what was happening in the map at that moment. I don't know, but you can see right here we've got quite the difference. But then in 4K, it's kicking ass. So for whatever reason, I think that 1440p test, even though I do it multiple times, the averages just had something to do with that match. But anyway, there we go. There's that. You know, I think it's a big deal that the 970 SLI, cheaper than the Kingpin, is beating it, obviously, in many, many tests, even at higher resolutions, showing that the 970 with 3.5 gigabytes of VRAM, you know, really accessible VRAM, is a contender. It is something to consider over a high-end card like this. Of course, you're going to have less profile issues. You're going to have less overclocking issues, less heat, less requirements of your system with a single card. So I'd still recommend it, but I just like seeing that a single card can beat an SLI config. And the SLI config, at least in some tests. But again, when we come back to the price here, is it really... I mean, considering the Kingpin is being beaten by the other cards, or at least matched by the other cards, or at least within 1% or 2% of the other cards, but at a price premium, is it worth it? Well, let's go ahead and talk about that right now. I've been just a little bit conflicted on how I want to end this video because it's a fine line talking about facts versus subjective opinions, and I kind of try to do my best to separate both. Now, I know what EVGA is doing here, and I know what Vince Kingpin's goal is with this card. This is a card basically where you want to go out and have all the custom shit that Vince does, and he's going to put as much of that as he possibly can on a card, put his name on it, and be like, the potential in this card is the best you could possibly buy. And that's what they're going for with this. The part I have a problem with is how many people are really going for that. Now, I guess that's something where it's up to you to decide if that's what you want in a card. But if you're looking to just buy a 980 Ti, take it out of the box and put it in a system, this is not really the most cost-effective way of getting good 980 Ti performance, because as you saw with the Gigabyte card being $210 less than this guy is, because this is a $899 ASIC card. This is a 77% card. $899, $900 graphics card. And for $689, you can get the Gigabyte G1 Gaming, which is going to give you, what, within 2% of the performance I was getting with this card? Is that 2% worth $210 to you? I mean, that's the subjective part. Now, if you're like, okay, I just want to buy a card that I can rip the cooler off, which is unfortunate, because that's kind of the best part of this card, is this sexy, sexy copper cooler, then we'll keep it in view. We'll keep it nice and pretty over there. Then that's definitely the card for you. It's got the 14+3 VRM power phase delivery. It's got Samsung NAND in there for the memory. So I was able to even overclock this memory over plus 400. In fact, I did plus 500 and when I was doing my overclocking and stuff, and it stayed stable for me, but I backed it off to plus 400 because I wanted to make sure I wasn't going to get any crashes. The problem is when you crash halfway through your benchmark suite, you got to start all freaking over and it takes forever. So I backed it off to plus 400. Most of the other cards are not using Samsung memory, which are lesser quality. So the components picked for this card are top-notch, top-shelved, best componentry that you can pretty much get to build a GPU with. So the part that disappoints me is that the card was just not able to live up to a standard of overclocking as far as I'm concerned, at least not out of the box. I can't speak for its LN2 potential. This card could still be a dud on LN2 for all I know, because I haven't tested that. But if you're just an average buyer and you're looking at the pricing going, wow, the price of this card and the ASIC quality and all that sort of stuff, you would think this card's going to be fantastic. But as you saw, it was 4 megahertz behind the Gigabyte G1 Gaming. Now, it beat the Gigabyte in all the tests, which is kind of funny considering the fact that they're the exact same core. But the supporting infrastructure on this card is better for the GPU. There was no throttling, 170% power target. I mean, that's insane, 170%. You can go 70% above the reference power target or reference design of the GPU. And that's kind of insane. In fact, in all of my testing, even overclocked, we were reaching like 89 to 95% power target. So that 170 didn't even really make a difference at all. So that's clearly going to be for when you really start bumping up that power delivery. But I can't do that because that's not the type of testing that I do. Now the question is, are there any 980 Ti's that can even reach that 1550 plus mark? 1550 plus, like 1600 is just pretty much unheard of. All the cards I have seem to sit right around that 1520 mark. A little below, a little bit above. My Titan X's over here all sit at about 1500, and then the other one that I have, as you saw, crapped out at 1400. So the GM200 seems to be very, very picky when it comes to overclocking. So how much does it matter when you build a card like this with all the supporting stuff on it? Are you really going to get what Are you really going to get anything above those numbers? Right now, the data that I have in here is saying that no, you're not going to. But as you can see, performance is still going to vary. Now, just putting full disclosure out there, this is actually the second 980 Ti KINGPIN that I had. That's why this video took so long. The first one just would not go above 1520 megahertz no matter what I did. Didn't matter if I used the V-droop setting. It didn't matter if we were playing with the voltages. It was still like, that other card was I think a 78% ASIC quality, a little bit higher than this one. And it just didn't matter. We couldn't get above 1520. I thought, well, wait a minute. This is a KINGPIN card. This thing should just be like busting through the ceiling when it comes to the max achievable megahertz. But that just wasn't happening. So I took the card back over to EVGA. I live local to them, so that's fortunate. They got me another one all the way from Taiwan. And unfortunately, this card, as you saw, 1525 was the highest I could get out of it. Tons of crashing, anything above that, tons of crashing. Didn't matter if K-boost was on. It didn't matter if I was manually overclocking or doing over voltages or over boosting. Played with, guys, I spent so many days screwing around with this to where I finally am just, okay, 1525, that's where it is, that's where I'm gonna go. It's unfortunate. I thought the card should go higher, so I'm disappointed that it didn't. I'm a little disappointed that now I can understand one, but two KINGPIN cards back to back not going any higher than that, to me was very, very disappointing. I really expected more for the card, especially considering how much GM204 loved to overclock. Like 1600 on the classified, it was like set it, move the slider, boom, done, didn't touch it, stable as could be. These cards are picky as fuck. And it was really frustrating a guy like me who has tons of experience with overclocking to just have to sit there and say, well, I guess that's where I have to leave it. At the end of the day, overclocking this card left me frustrated, and that's what bugged me. Because I was used to the classified and the other KINGPIN cards just being so much better. But it's starting to look more and more like it's not the fault of EVGA or Gigabyte or MSI. It's starting to look like the GM200 is just extremely picky about the power delivery. Because I got this card stable at 1550. I ran Heaven Loop for almost a half hour, over 20 minutes. No crashes whatsoever. Stopped the test. Restarted the test, got an immediate gray screen with a hard lock, and never got 1550 to work again. So that's the part that really left me frustrated. It's like, why the hell did it stop working? But it's really looking like the power delivery on it is what makes things, kind of insane. Now, this isn't the only high-end overclocking card we're going to be looking at in here. We're going to be testing other cards. In fact, I do have, and this thing is heavy as hell, an MSI Lightning that we'll be taking a look at. So that's going to either validate or invalidate the idea of the KINGPIN card, when it comes to custom overclocking cards. If the core just can't handle it, it doesn't matter what you build around it, then the core is going to ultimately decide what it's willing to do or not. So there you go, guys. That is my honest opinion. I can't get any more honest than I did in this video. That's the whole point of doing this, is about being honest and transparent. I don't sugarcoat things. I don't hide things. That was my experience with it. And you guys have to decide whether or not paying a minimum of $180 more than another custom 980 Ti is worth it to you to have, well, honestly, what is really the sexiest 980 Ti on the market with a high ASIC quality. But remember, that doesn't mean anything when it comes to overclocking. It's just, hopefully you'll get a better overclocking experience than I did. But is it worth it to you? Do you guys think that the premium price on this card is worth it based on what you saw here today? Now, please, for the love of God, don't just take my word for this. Check out other reviews. I know there hasn't been a lot of reviews on this card out there, and unfortunately right now, I might be the only review on YouTube, but I really hope EVGA sends out some more samples of this card. And if it wasn't for the fact that I already know the results of what this card is, I might have sent it to another YouTuber to be like, hey, give me your opinion on this card. But I already know what the results are going to be because I spent a lot of time on this. I'd love to see another sample with another YouTuber or another written outlet to see what their experiences are. And you should do that too. Don't take just my opinion for this. I'm one voice. I am one experience. I'm one opinion in all of this. And I am not I'm not the final say on this card whatsoever. This is just my experience. So guys, thanks for watching. I know this video was long. If you guys want to follow me on Twitter or Instagram, usually that stuff is just more goofy. I do some tech stuff there, but it's really kind of just a goofy behind the scenes of me being stupid and talking about forehead goatees and stuff like that. Then you guys can head on over to Twitter or Instagram or Facebook or whatever. And that's it. If you guys don't want to follow me over there, then I will go ahead and see you in the next one. And it's time to get the hell out of here because I'm tired.